I ran my fingers along the smooth silk of my blouse, feeling the hum of the city through the floor-to-ceiling window. The sunlight reflected off the glass desk, catching the edge of my favorite coffee mug. My phone buzzed again, a name I hadn't seen in years lighting up the screen. "Jessica, are you free to chat?" My heart skipped. Of all the people in the world, it had to be Claire. Claire, the same girl who laughed at me in high school when I spent hours painting tiny figurines, insisting it was a waste of time. She had been part of the crowd that mocked my little hobby, a pastime that felt like magic to me while it drew smirks from everyone else. Now, as I glanced around my office, the curated shelves of my art, awards tucked neatly in frames, the soft hum of my sewing machine in the corner, I felt the irony twist in my chest. My hobby, once dismissed, had become the quiet engine of my life. I smiled, a flash of pride tinged with amusement. I took a slow sip of coffee, savoring the warmth, and tapped back. "Sure, let's talk." My thoughts raced. Would she even recognize me now? Would she remember the girl she mocked? The girl who spent nights bleeding color onto canvas while everyone else rolled their eyes? This was the moment I'd imagined for years, the reckoning that life had promised. And yet, a small part of me tightened at the thought. Not fear, exactly, but anticipation. The past and present were colliding, and I was ready to see how far I'd truly come. I was 16, hunched over my tiny easel in the corner of my bedroom, the smell of acrylics sharp in the air. My fingers were streaked with paint, and my hair clung damply to my forehead. Mom poked her head in, shaking her head. "Jessica, why do you waste your time with this childish nonsense? Focus on school, something practical." Her words stung, but the laughter from my classmates was worse. At lunch, Claire and her friends had gathered, snickering, holding up my sketches. "Look at this. She's trying to be an artist." Their words dripped with derision, sharp as needles. I felt my throat tighten, my hands shaking, but I forced a smile and packed my things quietly. My grandmother, sensing my despair, pulled me aside that evening. She handed me a small, leather-bound notebook. "For your ideas," she said softly, her eyes warm and knowing. "Some people will never understand what they can't imagine. Keep this safe. One day they'll see." I clutched the notebook like a lifeline. That night, alone in my room, I made a silent promise. I would not let their laughter define me. My hobby, the very thing they mocked, would become my refuge, my armor. The next months were a blur of stolen moments and secret experiments. I would sketch, paint, and craft long after everyone had gone to sleep. I learned the patience to refine, the courage to create even when no one applauded. I was building something quietly, stubbornly, something only I knew the value of. By the time I graduated, I had a small collection of work I dared to call my own. It wasn't much, but it was mine. That notebook, now dog-eared and filled with sketches, ideas, and dreams, felt heavier than any diploma. It was a map, a blueprint for the life I would carve out despite the doubts and mockery. After graduation, I moved into a tiny studio apartment with a second-hand desk and a relentless determination. I spent long nights experimenting, trying to figure out how to turn my hobby into something more than a secret indulgence. I sold my first hand-painted figurine online, trembling as I packaged it, unsure anyone would actually pay. That first sale, $5, barely enough for materials, felt monumental. I framed it in my mind like a trophy. Slowly, one sale became two, then a small commission, and eventually a local boutique requested my work. Along the way, I met Margot, a seasoned artisan with decades of experience. She didn't laugh at my enthusiasm. Instead, she scrutinized my work, nodded at my ideas, and offered advice. "You're stubborn, and that's your strength. But you need a plan. Treat this like a business, not just a hobby." Her mentorship was a revelation. I learned pricing, marketing, negotiation, all the skills that had eluded me when I'd been told my hobby was useless. Yet every day was still a struggle. Self-doubt crept in. Would anyone value this? Could I really make it? I hid my progress from my family, sharing only vague updates when pressed. Slowly, the small wins accumulated. My first profitable sale, the first major client who insisted on exclusivity, the first feature in a niche magazine. Each milestone whispered that I was on the right path. Every paint-stained evening, every late night redesigning a figurine, every anxious package shipped, it all counted. Through it all, I cherished the notebook from my grandmother. It became my strategy book, my emotional anchor. Margot once noticed it and smiled. The right ideas, properly nurtured, always find their way. By the time I turned 25, my little hobby had quietly transformed into a flourishing business. My studio was brimming with custom orders, and my online brand had a devoted following. And yet, the people who once mocked me had no idea. I posted modestly on social media, never hinting at the empire my hands had quietly built. The day they arrived, I made sure everything was exactly as it should be. The studio smelled faintly of cedar and varnish, sunlight spilling across my shelves lined with awards, delicate figurines, and carefully curated art pieces. I'd worn a tailored blouse that flowed just enough to feel effortless, hair tied back in a neat twist, eyes alert behind subtle glasses. Claire walked in first, her heels clicking against the polished floor. Her smile was tentative, unsure, and I felt the ghost of those high school taunts ripple through me. She looked around, and I let her take it all in, the space, the elegance, the unmistakable imprint of success. I didn't expect, she stammered, her eyes landing on a display case holding a custom piece I'd sold for a small fortune last month. I smiled softly, letting the silence stretch. Let them see it before I say it. Finally, I spoke, my voice calm, resonant. You remember those figurines you used to laugh at? The ones you said were a waste of time? She nodded, lips pressed tight. Well, I continued, gesturing around, this hobby, the one you mocked endlessly, is now my livelihood. My company ships internationally. My pieces are sought after by collectors. And yes, I'm financially independent. More than that, I own my brand entirely. What I loved when you laughed at me became my fortune. Her hand flew to her mouth. I had no idea. I let the pause linger. The sting of memory mixed with a quiet satisfaction. I didn't need to gloat. The truth carried its own weight. Her disbelief, her guilt, the flicker of shame across her face. That was the reaction I had imagined for years. Then other faces appeared, old classmates, distant relatives, even a former teacher. They all expected the awkward, struggling girl, the one they'd quietly dismissed. Instead, they were confronted by the confident, capable woman I had become. Every detail, from the expensive yet tasteful art on the walls to the neatly stacked invoices and contracts, screamed of independence and achievement. Jessica, Claire whispered, almost reverently. This is incredible. I simply nodded. It's what happens when passion isn't crushed by doubt or ridicule. I kept going, quietly. And now, here I am. It wasn't vengeance. It was revelation. They could finally see what persistence, belief, and a little stubbornness could achieve, the very qualities they had dismissed. With the room finally quiet, I set the terms. This wasn't about punishment. It was about accountability and growth. I looked each of them in the eye, letting them feel the weight of their previous dismissals. Claire, I began, if you want to be part of my world now, you need to let go of judgment. You need to support creativity instead of mocking it. Your first step is understanding, not criticism. To my other peers who had doubted me, I offered similar guidance. Respect the work of others, pursue your passions without fear of ridicule, and let ambition be paired with empathy. Small acts, I told them, but essential. I could have kept my success private, but I chose transparency, on my terms. I gave them access, yes, but only if they agreed to shed toxic habits and genuinely invest in growth. I wasn't here to rescue them from themselves, but to ensure they would no longer hinder anyone else. Each condition was tied to emotional insight. No more dismissals, no more small-minded comments, no more sneers at someone else's dreams. I could see the recognition dawning in their faces, a mixture of guilt and awe. They understood. The power had shifted. I added a final note, quietly but firmly. I'm generous, but I am not yours to manipulate. I am not the girl you mocked. I am someone who learned to value her own worth. Treat that worth with respect." The room was silent. And yet, in that silence, I felt something powerful, the balance of strength and compassion, of grace and authority. My success was mine, and now it would influence others in a way that mattered, reshaping old patterns into lessons of growth and understanding. Weeks later, I noticed subtle changes. Claire sent a careful, thoughtful note praising a new artist, genuinely curious instead of mocking. One former classmate enrolled in a creative course, pushing themselves past old fears. Even my own family approached me differently, with respect, curiosity, and a newfound recognition of my journey. I sat at my desk, notebook in hand, flipping through pages filled with sketches, doodles, and ideas that had once been laughed at. The leather cover was worn, edges frayed, but the pages were priceless. This notebook, my grandmother's gift, had carried me from doubt to fortune. It had held my dreams when no one else would. I traced a finger over the words she once wrote. "Some people will never understand what they can't imagine. Keep this safe. One day they'll see." And now they had. But more importantly, I had. I allowed myself a quiet smile, sipping coffee as sunlight spilled into the room. The journey had been long, painful, and exhilarating. I had endured ridicule, self-doubt, and countless sleepless nights, yet I had emerged stronger, more resilient, and fully in control of my life. Finally, I leaned back, letting the satisfaction wash over me. I was proud, not just for the wealth or recognition, but for the woman I had become, someone who honored her passions, held her boundaries, and inspired change simply by living her truth. And as I looked around my studio, my sanctuary, I whispered to myself, a soft but powerful vow. They laughed at me once. Now, I create the world they never believed I could.